We're approaching the end of 2025, CS2 has been out for over 2 years, so how many people still can't play it on their setup? For this, I am taking a look at Valve's latest Steam hardware survey, which tracks what's in people's PCs every month, documenting the gradual creep in hardware capability that everybody has. So we'll start by looking at what is needed to run CS2. It states that it needs these specs. The requirements may have shifted one way or another following updates to the game as new features are added or as further optimizations have been rolled out for the game, but let's keep it simple, for now. It states that it needs a processor with 4 hardware CPU threads, which to me means that it either needs an older 4-core processor, like the i5 it details, or a newer 2-core processor with multi-threading. Now, multi-threading is dirty. It's where a core can act like 2 cores for certain workloads, which in practice equates to like 30% performance boost in certain tasks. It's no substitute for more real cores, but it's better than nothing, which is why Intel were able to charge such a premium for their i7 processors for years, with people banking on its hyper-threading for extra future-proofing. So let's see what everybody has. I present to you the number of PC physical CPU details. I am pretty confident this doesn't count multi-threading, unless 30% of users have suddenly rushed out and bought a 3-core processor. No, these 6-core processors likely have 6 proper cores, plus 6 multi-threaded ones, totaling 12. So I'm going to say that everything here and beyond is pretty much guaranteed to run CS2. So that's already 83.3% of users. We can rule out everybody with just 1 or 3 cores, because come on, those are older than CSGO is at this point. Which leaves a question mark over the 2 and 4 CPU core users. I would say the overwhelming majority of 4-core processors can run CS2, but there might be some 15-year-old Phenoms or Q6600s in this category which will struggle to run it, and maybe some newer low-power processors in laptops and such which aren't as powerful as their core counts suggest. But then the flip side is also true with the 2 CPU results, where most of them might be underpowered and old, but there will be a few i3s from 2016 or 2017 with hyperthreading in this category, which could still run CS2 rather playably. But yeah, I'm going to say that almost 97% of Steam users can run CS2 with their current CPU. Here's the same page from March 2018, just out of interest, and how things have changed. Back then it was roughly split between 1/4 of people on 2 cores and 3/4 on 4 cores, compared with now where over half of users either have 6 or 8 core processors. Now that's progress. Thank you, Ryzen. Next up, graphics cards. CS2 uses the GPU a lot more than CSGO did. Modern graphics cards are insanely powerful, and Source 2 is better geared up to using their resources. But it's also a lot more demanding. I doubt many people will be getting better performance in CS2 than they did in CSGO. And unfortunately, it's hard to know for sure from the hardware survey just how much of its user base can actually run CS2. Almost any graphics card with a proper name from the last 10 years should be able to, and if you were to buy one today, then even the cheapest of the new cards available to you are overkill for the task. So let's go through what might not be able to run CS2 from the survey results. Anything named like this, where it's just AMD Radeon graphics or Intel UHD graphics, is likely not a proper graphics card and is just onboard graphics attached to the processor in some way. So if we add all those up, a worst case percentage of people with graphics cards unable to run CS2 would be about 20%, but that's worst case. Here I featured some in yellow, where they could still be pretty decent performers, like the Radeon 780M, which is integrated but is surprisingly good, or Intel's Arc, a category which I presume also includes their dedicated Arc graphics cards, some of which are modern and mid-range, and are more than capable of handling CS2 very decently. And while I imagine a lot of these integrated Radeon chips are a load of rubbish, some should still be good enough to be able to run CS2. I didn't dare consider the other category, where it's simply unknown which graphics card is being used, as that percentage does more or less line up with the number of users on DirectX 8 GPUs or below, and these certainly won't be up to the task of handling CS2. In fact, that's a staggering number of users who are on standards more than 20 years old, who I'm going to assume are from poorer regions around the world. So best case, maybe closer to 85% of users have a graphics card that can handle CS2, but I'm going to err on the side of caution and say it's still around the 80% mark. The 8GB of RAM requirement rules out about 1.5% of users. I mean, you get different tiers of RAM as well, but let's just say 8 or more is required to run CS2. Chances are the people with a component that can't run CS2 will be the most likely to also have other components which will also struggle to run it. But the big overwhelming limiting factor in most cases, looking at the Steam hardware survey right now, seems to be the graphics card. Being able to play CS2 is one thing, but having a computer good enough to really be able to play it and to want to play on it is another. So I'm going to up the standards now and impose requirements which should more or less guarantee that you can play the game decently. Requiring 6 cores finally cuts out all of the old 4 cores from the equation. Some of that's a bit unfair, but that's offset by a few older 6 cores still being included, like the Bulldozers and Phenom 2s. So with that in mind, just 82.5% of users have a CPU that I consider to be capable of running CS2 well. For RAM, I'll say that we need at least 16, which has been the standard for ages, still like a magical amount that can still just about handle pretty much everything, and demanding that means that 88% of PCs hit that requirement. And for graphics cards, I imposed a bare minimum of 8GB of VRAM. This is a fairly brutal ask, since it drops a lot of semi-decent 4 and 6GB cards which, on paper, land well above CS2's minimum specs. But given the high frame rate requirements of a Twitch shooter, requiring 8GB of VRAM brute forces all remaining cards to be at least half decent, be it flagships from 10 years ago or newer, more budget cards with very generous VRAM amounts for their speeds. And even this ludicrous requirement still leaves a few stinkers, like the Chinese 8GB variant of the Radeon 550, which I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. But it probably can still run CS2. And this hardy requirement leaves just 2/3 of people on the Steam hardware survey whose PCs can handle CS2. So at the end of 2025, still about 1/3 of Steam users can't run the game well. But here's hoping a lot of those can still run it okay at lower settings and might have the option to upgrade to a newer graphics card if they really need to, rather than having to replace their entire PC. So that's the current situation, but how much has it changed? Well, I looked back and checked out the survey at CS2's official release back in September 2023, and then again to the same amount of time from before the game was released, for science. And here's how things have progressed. Surprise, surprise, as time has gone on, more and more people's PCs have reached both the minimum spec and the recommended that I've imposed upon it. Of course, this only occurs if somebody has upgraded during this time. It's not like your PC will magically grow more capable if you simply stick to it. But it's staggering how a few years have made such a big difference to the number of people hitting certain targets. As an example, back in 2021, only 85% of PCs had a processor that I deem capable of running CS2 at all. Today it's more like 97%. RAM has had a similar development, going from 88% of people with just 8GB of RAM a few years ago, up to 98% right now. In fact, 16 or more gigabytes of RAM today is as prevalent as 8GB was in 2021. That's a huge amount of upgrading that's been going on in the last 4 years. Although I guess it helps that RAM has been such a cheap and affordable commodity. Literally cheap as chips. Not literally. And certainly not now. The slowest metric to improve has been the GPU's VRAM, which has only gone from 89% before the game's release, to 91% at the game's release, to 93% today. This means that VRAM has gone from being the easiest requirement to hit to being the hardest. And I hesitate to say why that is, or even if that is the case. Because apparently the number of people with less than 1GB of VRAM is growing, and that doesn't make any sense. So I wonder if it's just a thing with onboard graphics where it dynamically allocates only as much VRAM as it needs at that given moment, and that maybe a lot of people who were on super ancient desktop PCs may just be upgrading to laptops with semi-decent onboard graphics instead. That long convoluted answer would explain why this amount of VRAM is increasing. I can't think of any other reason for it. Also, I question how useful a metric the amount of VRAM is anyway, because sure, CS2 might only need 1GB of VRAM, but if no card with that amount actually has enough power to run the game well, shouldn't you just say 2GB of VRAM? Surely that would be more representative. Or 4GB of VRAM just to be doubly safe, or 8 just to be super duper quadruply extra safe, just like I am. Anyway, if you opt to go by Valve's stated minimum VRAM spec, 93% of users have the VRAM required to run CS2. If you opt for my recommended 8GB of VRAM, just 68% of players can run it well. The reality lies somewhere between these two extremes. Like earlier, looking at the names of each and every graphics card entry on the list, I more accurately predicted that the real number is closer to 80%. So slap bang in between these two amounts. Plotting it on a graph, you can see the progress a little more easily, like how the VRAM minimum has progressed slowest, and how it's the RAM requirements that's easiest for people to hit, followed by the CPU core requirement, with the GPU VRAM requirement coming in last. But I hate this graph, because it doesn't start from 0%. But if I do this to it, then sure, all the data is crammed up there close to the 100% mark at the top, making it hard to see how the lines have changed over time. But that's exactly it. The lines haven't really changed much over time, because even in the 2021 data, almost everyone's PCs were already capable of hitting the minimum specs for Counter-Strike 2. So I think this representation of the data really hits home at how most people's PCs do manage to reach CS2's minimum spec. My recommended specs, on the other hand, show a different story. But it's here we can see just how many people since 2021 have upgraded to specs, which I consider to be capable of playing this game decently well. In 2021, less than 1/3 of users had a graphics card with 8GB of VRAM. These days it's more than 2/3. Now that's progress, even if VRAM amounts in graphics cards haven't really grown that much. It's important to note the estimates and assumptions made in reaching this point, but it's interesting to see the creep of time gradually making CS2's system requirements more and more attainable. But the big question I have from all of this is, which year would CS2 have needed to have been released in for people not to complain about its system requirements? If it had come out today, would there have been fewer complaints? What if it had been released sooner, like in 2021? Would people have complained more about it then upgraded their rigs sooner, and thus resulted in fewer complaints about its performance today? What is it that drives progress most? Is it faster PCs causing prettier games to be made, or is it prettier games driving PC sales forward? And how long will it be before we hit milestones like 99% of PCs being able to run the game, or for more people to reach recommended spec than there were hitting minimums at release day? Interesting observation, Valve's upcoming Steam machine hits all the recommended requirements that I've listed here. If everybody rushed out and bought one of those at release day, not that this is an advert for people to do so, but if they did, then the percentage of people able to run CS2 would shoot up to 100%. And I imagine that Valve's goal with the Steam machine is to release some kind of minimum spec device that if people get, they can at least guarantee that they'll be able to run games like CS2 acceptably well.